Our next panel is on, of course, hazard mitigation plans. And I know that our fire marshal of CAL FIRE, Daniel Berlant, is here. I want to turn it over to Daniel and thank him for being here with us. Thanks, Daniel. The floor is yours.
Yeah, well, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for having me. As introduced, my name is Daniel Berlant. I am California's State Fire Marshal, and while I am primarily responsible for fire prevention, whether it be the building code, the fire code, I also spend a significant amount of time focused on wildfire preparedness and wildfire resiliency. Again, whether it be how we construct homes, how we maintain homes, or how we plan communities and even retrofit to harden communities against wildfires. That really is my focus as California's State Fire Marshal. I'm going to share my screen here, and as I do, it's not necessarily a secret that really in just the last decade, California has experienced some of its largest, most destructive, and even deadliest wildfires. And some of that is natural. Our dry Mediterranean climate here in California has always lent itself to wildfires. But really, it's been more recent that a confluence, if you will, of issues have led to an immense wildfire crisis. And I should take a step back. If you don't know who CAL FIRE is, we are the state's fire and forestry department. We protect over a third of the state against wildfires. We work hand in hand with local fire departments, fire districts, and many communities up and down the state. And again, while we do a number of things, fire and wildfire is really our focus. And efforts to reduce the impact and even the threat of those wildfires has long been a part of our mission. But over the past few years, we've really doubled down our efforts and our focus on wildfire resiliency. Now, despite the complexities and the challenges that we have, we do have a strong strategy in wildfires. Our roadmap comes from the state's Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force. This is a collaboration between state, federal, local, and even tribal entities who have all come together to create an interagency framework that establishes healthy and resilient forests, which we know are an important part of this problem, protecting and preparing communities, all of which, to both our forests and our communities, working to make sure that they can withstand and adapt to wildfire, drought, and even a changing climate. In 2021, the task force published an action plan, and that action plan really is our North Star for wildfire resiliency. It sets 4 goals, 99 key actions, and we've made major investments in our state's response capabilities. Just at CAL FIRE alone, we have over 12,000 firefighters and personnel. We have increased the number of aircraft we have available, adding more new aircraft for the first time in decades to the fleet. We have now 16 new Black Hawk type Firehawk helicopters. We're retrofitting C-130s. We've added firefighters, we've added equipment, we've added new technology, whether it be detection software or AI software to help us in detection and efficiencies in response. Even with all of these numbers and all of these enhancements, partnered, by the way, that's really important, with our local fire departments and districts through the mutual aid process. When you add in our federal firefighting agency partners, the nearly 1,000 local and tribal fire departments across California, again, arguably probably the most strongest wildfire response capabilities in the world. And even with this strong fire protection operation, it's so important to understand that we're not going to respond our way out of this crisis. So our wildfire resilience strategy is really focused on 3 core areas. And I like to show this graphic because it is all of these things together. In the center there, you see the parcel level mitigations around individual property owners, our own homes, whether that be clearing defensible space in and around our homes, known as, again, defensible space, building or retrofitting homes with ember and ignition resistant building materials, But community hardening also incorporates, I'm going to expand a bit this on community hardening here in a moment, but it's really land use planning, design standards for developing new neighborhoods, building fuel breaks in and around communities, reducing overgrown vegetation near roadways and evacuation routes. And then thirdly, that last circle that you see on this image is our forest, restoring at landscape level our ecosystems, removing the overcrowding in our forests, putting prescribed fire back on the ground. But we have to be doing all of these things. We have to take efforts at our own individual homes at the property level. We have to harden our community, do items for community hardening roadway access, but also maintain our forests. And we've been doing a significant amount of that over the last several years. But again, all three of these things are critical in our wildfire resilience strategy. But I want to kind of narrow in on community resiliency. That really is where my team is focused, and really to achieve community resilience, it's a systems approach, and maybe you'll see a little bit of theme. We can't just pick one thing and do it. We have to do all of these things together. So in addition to fire protection, making sure we have strong response, we have to take steps to prepare and harden our communities against wildfires. Now, I really love this graphic. It's such a great representation of all the necessary elements for land use planning for wildfires. And some of these are the responsibility of homeowners. Some belong to community planners and building officials well before the parcel is even built and occupied. Some of these belong to developers and builders as they're building these homes. And many of these are also private partners like utilities. But again, to achieve community resiliency, we have to have broad agreement and alignment on mitigation across all of these stakeholders. So to help focus on this, in 2022, the legislature created a new division within my office, within CAL FIRE, that is solely focused on wildfire mitigation efforts. It's called the Community Wildfire Preparedness and Mitigation Division. And our role is to not only support the state's efforts in fire prevention, but to support local special districts, cities, counties, make sure that they're prioritizing and implementing strategies to ensure that their local communities, your local communities, are adapted to wildfire and again can withstand to protect those communities. So again, one of those programs that I mentioned earlier that I'll be highlighting here is our land use planning program. It's within our Community Wildfire Preparedness and Mitigation Division. And our land use planning program as a whole helps support local jurisdictions like yourself in wildfire preparedness. The team's comprised of fire captains, battalion chiefs that all provide technical expertise on wildfires, and they help prepare communities on what things they need to do to be wildfire prepared. And what does that mean? What are the laws that are out there? What are the best practices? What are the resources? What is the funding that's available? The program aids local jurisdictions in fire hazard planning, offering collaborative technical assistance for fire hazard planning within the general plan of safety elements. So every city and every county, as you all know, is required to have a general plan. And one of the required elements of a general plan is the safety element. And so our team helps make sure that jurisdictions are incorporating wildfire mitigations strategies, best practices within those elements of a general plan. But they're also available to assist with other wildfire elements, whether it be the local hazard mitigation plans that our partners at CalOES, I know we'll talk about here momentarily. But if your community is developing a community wildfire protection plan, our team is there to assist. And the part that I love is that to our local partners, this is a free service. We are really trying to make sure that we are giving the resources to local communities to assist themselves. But there is no charge in that effort because we want to, again, develop communities that don't need our fire suppression response. So more specifically, some of those elements that we'll include in these various plans are fire hazard severity zones. We just recently updated for the state responsibility area. So we make sure that these planning documents are incorporating the most recent maps. They're knowledgeable, and we provide guidance on wildfire mitigation standards, whether that's defensible space requirements. There's new legislation requiring a focus on the first 5 feet, the ember resistant zone, building construction, Within our state building code, we have a specific chapter just for homes built in wildfire-prone areas. So these individuals help make sure that those building construction items, as well as community planning standards, whether that be roadway widths, water supply, fuel breaks, there's just a whole list of others. But again, we're just really trying to make sure that planners of communities are armed and informed of this information. We recently put together a training the last couple of years. We've rolled it out to city, county, and community planners, building officials, and fire officials to really try to make sure that at all scales, not just the fire service, but building and planning as well, that we're all educated, because wildfires have obviously started in the last several years really hitting and burning into communities that maybe didn't think that they had a wildfire problem. But one other thing I want to mention is our team supports communities in completing all the application requirements to become a recognized FireWise USA community. It's a national program, a voluntary program, but we're so proud that really in the coming days, we're going to hit the 800th recognized FireWise community here in California, which by far is the most FireWise communities in the nation. And again, that is one of the roles that this team does, is help neighborhoods get that recognition. Now, in the wake of the wildfires that we had in 2018, 2020, 21, California has made really unprecedented investments in wildfire resiliency. To carry out these programs, we really have surged our funding from roughly $200 million just a number of years ago, all the way up to $2.6 billion over the past several years. And this funding is spread across state departments, but most of it is available through grants to local organizations, whether that be for planning efforts, whether that be for fuel reduction work, whether that be for forest health efforts. This funding is really geared towards local community projects, going backwards to the strategies of the Wildfire Forest Resilience Task Force. And really, if 2022 and even 2023 did anything, it demonstrated to us that when we invest in resiliency at scale, we can actually see results even in the face of extreme climate conditions. One other program I want to quickly mention is we have been working with the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services to develop a financial assistance program to help focus on home hardening initiatives, to retrofit, harden, and create defensible space for homes in high-risk areas to wildfire, but focusing on highly social vulnerable communities, providing financial assistance to low and moderate income households, because we recognize that to do this wildfire resiliency work, not everybody can afford to do the work. Not everybody can physically do the work. And so making sure that we're taking care of our socially vulnerable has been a priority of ours as well. And this effort really encourages cost-effective wildfire resilience measures to create fire-resistant homes and other businesses and other buildings. I'll leave you with this slide with some resources. And although California, we've in recent, it was already mentioned, we're seeing rain the last coming in here this weekend, and we've had significant rain this winter, which is great. We're already busy preparing ourselves for peak fire season. The grass in many areas, the brush, it's tall, it's green, and it will soon start to die out. And so that will absolutely affect our community's safety. And so this work is so important, even when we have rainy times of the year like now. We need to be prepared, and really our progress in doing this work and our ability to focus now during times where we aren't at peak fire season will ensure that long term we address our forest health, that we have safe, prepared, sustainable coexistence with fire. So for all of you who live in wildfire-prone areas or near them, please go to some of these online tools that will help you get some tips on what you can do or how you can prepare your community, your employees, whomever it may be. But on the left, the readyforwildfire.org website just has a significant amount of resources. But on the right, our CAL FIRE Office State Fire Marshal website, you can find more about our land use planning program, the technical assistance, the resources available to help your organization, your district really play a role in this effort, because it is really an effort that we all have to be working on together. So with that, I appreciate the time, and I'll turn it back to our moderator, and then I'm happy to answer questions towards the end.
So hi, everybody. My name is Joshua Torres. I'm with Southern California Edison. I'm a senior policy advisor. Hopefully everybody can see my screen right now. So today I'm going to be sharing a little bit of information about how these climate threats are, the changing climate is affecting our load forecast and how we build out the electric grid, and what we're doing to make sure that it is resilient and reliable and ready for our changing environment, as well as the impact of state policy goals. So there are four main buckets of trends that are shaping our view of how we need to plan our infrastructure, right? So infrastructure typically has really long lead times. So we're not just looking at, what we need to build next year or the year after. We're looking at like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years down the road. So we're looking at very long-term trends. Being in California, obviously, we have very ambitious environmental goals, right? So there's a huge push from the state for 100% clean energy, for zero carbon. So there's a lot of laws and regulations that are having an impact on our future load forecasts, right? We're seeing a lot of customers looking at electrifying, whether it's their vehicles or their built infrastructure. Obviously, the 100% clean energy goal is fundamentally changing our generation mix, right? We're moving away from fossil fuels towards carbon-free resources, things like solar farms, wind farms, both onshore and offshore, advanced geothermal, large-scale utility battery storage, right? And so all of those resources have to get connected to the grid. We have to build transmission lines and sub-transmission lines to bring that power to market. But the clean energy transition is not just the push, there's also the pull, right? So obviously we have the push from the state saying you have to do X, Y, Z, but we're also trying to be responsive to customer demand, right? We're seeing mass adoption of things like electric vehicles. I believe Tesla is like one of the top 3 best-selling electric vehicles of any type in California. And it's just really remarkable, even considering a couple of years ago, they weren't eligible for the federal tax credit. So, this is just, customers saying, I really like this, I want this. We're also seeing a lot of customer installed solar and batteries. That has huge impacts on the distribution system and how we build it and how we operate it. So there's this push-pull for the clean energy transition, but then we're also adapting to a changing environment, right? So our climate is getting warmer, and so that's having all kinds of different impacts, right? We're having to adapt to sea level rise, coastal erosion. We have longer periods of drought, which has impacts on our hydroelectric facilities, followed by high periods of intense rain, almost monsoonal conditions that can damage infrastructure. We already talked about the impacts from wildfire, right? We're seeing the wildfire season pretty much year round. Wildfires are larger, more intense. We're also seeing more intense heat waves, right? We've always had heat waves in California, but with the warming climate, they're getting longer, they're getting more intense. Right, we're seeing areas of our service territory that previously didn't get impacted by heat waves now are significantly impacted, right? Like a lot of coastal zones, right? So all of these different trends are impacting how we're planning for the grid. And the common theme is that we're seeing a major need for investment, right? We need to proactively invest in the grid to accommodate it. All these different trends to make sure that the energy system is reliable and resilient and meeting customer expectations. So doing a deep dive on the climate vulnerabilities. So a couple of years ago, May 2022 to be precise, we released our analysis, the climate adaptation and vulnerability assessment. So we looked at our entire service territory, right? 50,000 square miles, 5.5 million customers, 15 million people. We looked at it community by community, right? And we have a very diverse service territory in Southern California, right? We've got coastal, we've got desert, we've got dense urban areas, we've got agricultural areas, mountain areas. And so all of those different unique areas are going to have different challenges adapting to a changing environment, right? And what are those impacts going to be on the electric system, right? And what do we have to do to harden the electric system to make sure that it can withstand more intense heat waves, more flooding, more wildfires, etc. A major conclusion from our analysis was also that the cost of proactively doing this work is significantly less than doing it reactively, right? And that's just the dollar amount, right? That doesn't even take into consideration the human impact, right? Thinking about, right, if we invest money now and we harden the grid so it doesn't get impacted by these extreme weather events, that's going to be cheaper, but also there's the disruption, right? If we wait for these natural disasters to happen before we do these investments, that means customers are without power for days or possibly even weeks, right? So there's a lot of different benefits to incorporating these investments now and starting to harden the grid slowly over time rather than waiting until the disasters happen. And so we are starting to work these recommendations into our regular spending plan, which is called the general rate case, right? So every 4 years, we have to submit our plan to the Public Utilities Commission of how we are going to invest customer dollars. And so we're incorporating the findings from this vulnerability assessment into our regular spending plan. I'm doing a deep dive on the wildfire topic in particular, right? This is something that's had an outsized impact over the last like 6 years or so. And this slide right here just covers the infrastructure piece, which is the focus of my presentation today. But I did want to acknowledge that there's an equally large amount of work happening on the operations side, right? Vegetation management, enhanced emergency operational procedures, et cetera. But on the infrastructure piece, right, we've been proactively investing in the grid to harden it against wildfire threats for several years now. We've primarily focused on the covered conductor program. So covered conductor is regular conductor that has a special PVC coating that prevents or significantly reduces the risk of objects coming into contact with our wires and causing a spark, right? Because they have that protective plastic coating. We've done like 4,000 plus miles of covered conductor, and we still have a couple more years of work, but that project is slowly starting to wind down, and we're pivoting more towards our targeted undergrounding program. And the reason that we did that, we prioritized the covered conductor first because it's faster, it's cheaper, it's easier to deploy, and we needed to get that out as quickly as possible, right? We needed to reduce this risk, reduce the impact to customers, the number of times that they're out due to public safety power shutoffs. So that's why we prioritize the covered conductor over the undergrounding. But over the next few years, we're going to start ramping up our targeted undergrounding project to target those areas where covered conductor isn't a good solution. And there's a bunch of other upgrades we've done to the infrastructure, right? We've installed a lot of protective devices, so devices that monitor for disruptions in a circuit and can shut off electricity within a millisecond, reducing the likelihood of an ignition. We've done a lot of sectionalization, right? A lot of times, only a portion of a circuit might be exposed to a wildfire threat. So if we can sectionalize that piece and separate it from the rest of the circuit and only de-energize that tiny little piece, the rest of the circuit can stay energized, right? We've installed a lot of fire-resistant poles, which helps with the recovery effort, right? We can get power back online much quicker after a wildfire event if the poles are still standing. In addition to the climate vulnerability assessment, we've also done a clean energy assessment. So we looked at all of the state's environmental goals and said, what is it going to take to get there, right? How do we get to 100% clean energy? How do we accommodate all this electrification for vehicles, for buildings, for other sectors of the economy? And we found that we need a massive investment in the electric grid, right? So we need the investment for adapting to the climate, but we also need the investment for transitioning away from fossil fuels. So like on the transmission side, we need to increase the rate at which we build transmission by a factor of about 4x. Right. So again, this is connecting all those wind and solar and, hopefully advanced technologies, next generation technologies like advanced geothermal, connecting those to the grid so that way we can reliably deliver carbon-free energy 24 hours a day. We also have a significant need to upgrade the distribution system, even more so than the transmission system, right? So these are the poles and wires that are in your neighborhood, that last mile connection between you and the grid, right? So for example, for circuits, right, we need to increase the rate at which we're building circuits by a factor of 10x, right? So usually we build maybe like, a few dozen circuits a year, and we need to do a couple hundred. So it's a huge amount of growth. We are looking at new technologies, new standards, new ways of designing and operating the grid to help bring down that infrastructure build out need. But regardless, even in our very most optimistic scenarios where all these new technologies and all these new techniques pan out, we're still seeing exponential growth in the rate that we have to build out the grid in order to accommodate all these different factors, right? All these customer trends, all these policy trends. This is a little bit of a deep dive on one issue in particular, which is vehicle electrification, right? So as part of our current general rate case proceeding, we have proposed to the Public Utilities Commission that we proactively build a series of distribution and sub-transmission projects to expand capacity, right? So we've been looking at where customers are adopting electric vehicles the fastest, and that's putting a lot of constraint on the grid. It's causing a lot of delays, right? Customers want to connect, but the power capacity isn't there. So historically, the state has required that we be reactive, that we wait until the customers come to us before we start initiating projects. But that's not optimal for the customers, right? Nobody wants to wait, 2 to 5 years for their project to get energized. So we want to flip that on its head. We have a really high degree of confidence, like 95% confidence around these projections. So we're trying to make the case to the state that, hey, this is in the best interest of everybody. It's cheaper, it's better for the customer, it's better for the economy. If we could start these projects now, so that way the capacity is online when the customers expect it. And I do want to emphasize that this is not just limited to transportation electrification, right? This benefits everybody, right? If you have a new housing development, or, if your special district is looking at expanding, building a new facility, right? Having more capacity in your area, that's going to benefit everybody, not just people in the transportation electrification space. So I mentioned earlier, right, we have our general rate case, right? So all of this comes back to our general rate case, right? This is our spending plan. We have to develop a proposal, take it to the Public Utilities Commission every 4 years. It's debated in a public proceeding, and ultimately the Public Utilities Commission will decide, what exactly gets kept in, what gets left out. For just our standard operations, we're actually asking for a decrease. We have been really focusing on operational efficiency, lowering our costs for delivering electricity so we can create bandwidth to invest in the grid, right? Because we recognize we can't just keep dumping more costs on customers. But even still, the amount of proactive grid build out that we're asking for is going to result in a slight increase. But it's an investment, right? These are things that are necessary to make the grid reliable, resilient, and ready to meet the expectations of how California is going to be changing over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right? So we have a lot of investments planned around improving reliability, right? There's huge sections of Southern California where the distribution system was built, post World War II. It's 70 plus years old. It's reached the end of its useful life. It just needs to be replaced. We talked a lot about the wildfire resiliency investments. Obviously, we're continuing to make those investments, but we're also looking at other threats, things like cyber terrorism, right? How can we harden our IT infrastructure to make sure that the electric grid is less vulnerable to cyber attacks? And then we're also talked a little bit about growing the grid proactively to make sure that we have that capacity as customers are adopting clean energy technologies, that the grid is available, right? And then they're not having to wait inordinate amounts of time to connect their project, whether it's a battery storage facility or an EV charging facility or whatever that might be. So, the common theme with all of these is, we're trying to invest in the grid to make sure that it's meeting customer expectations and facilitating economic growth and the clean energy transition. With that, I'm happy to turn it back over, and I'll be sticking around for the Q&A at the end.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melissa Boudrye. I am the Chief of Resilience for the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services within the Resilience Branch, which is a newly established branch which we have just launched this year. Just a bit of background of the California Office of Emergency Services. Our agency is responsible for supporting communities before, during, and after disasters. But a bit of background specifically about the resilience branch. Based on some of the trends that we've been seeing over the last 8 years in the increasing severity and frequency of disasters, the governor approved an allocation of funding to develop a resiliency branch. So we have established the resilience branch as of this year. So we'll be doing an increasing amount of hiring over the next few months to make sure that we are staffed up in support of that team. But our intent is to be able to provide additional support and technical assistance to jurisdictions throughout the state to be able to provide support in developing sub-applications for potential grant opportunities and the development of mitigation projects. The mission of the California Resilience Branch is to foster resilient California by aligning mitigation planning with grant selection and implementation. Our mission is to empower communities, including those historically underserved, to compete on national and state levels for funds that enhance their resilience against natural disasters. Through innovative project and technical assistance, we aim to reduce long-term risks, promote climate adaptation, and fortify infrastructure, fostering a state that thrives in the face of adversity. Some key terms and definitions for you. Resilience is defined as a capability to anticipate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from significant multi-hazard threats with minimum damage to social well-being, the economy, and the environment. Hazard mitigation is defined as any sustainable action that reduces or eliminates long-term risk to people and property from future disasters. And sustainability has been defined as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So how can we help? We've got a series of mitigation program staff that are available to support our communities in the development and seeking of funding for mitigation programs. Our planning team is comprised of a state and local planning team, which helps the development of local hazard mitigation plans and the development of our state hazard mitigation plan as well. Our technical assistance division, which is our newly established division under the resilience branch, will be there to support all communities throughout the state of California in the development of sub-applications for funding opportunities for mitigation projects. Our grants division supports the development of post-award hazard mitigation grants funded by FEMA and the management of those projects. Our quality assurance division promotes the habit of continuous improvement to ensure that we are monitoring the effectiveness of our mitigation grants and being able to prevent hazards and the risks of disasters throughout the community. We do all of this in coordination with our federal, state, and local partners, including our FEMA Region 9 partners, DWR, OPR, as well as CAL FIRE, among others. Do you want to take a moment to speak towards our State Hazard Mitigation Plan, otherwise known as the SHIMP? Our State Hazard Mitigation Plan was recently updated and approved in August of 2023. It is updated every 5 years to include the impacts of recent disasters and additional potential hazards based on some of the impacts of climate adaptation. It is our foundational document, and it is a pretty hefty, nearly 2,000-page document that lists all of our hazards, potential risks, and strategies throughout the communities, throughout the state. It outlines actions to be implemented upon adoption. Our team is actively working on a series of workshops and webinars to be able to help staff and our jurisdictions navigating the SHIMP and utilizing it to develop not only their local mitigation plans, but also potential project ideas in an effort to pursue mitigation funding. Our primary goals within the SHIMP are to significantly reduce the risk to life, community lifelines, the environment, property, and infrastructure by planning and implementing whole community risk reduction and resilience strategies, to build capacity and capabilities to increase disaster resilience among historically underserved populations, individuals with access and functional needs, and communities disproportionately impacted by disasters and climate change, to incorporate equity metrics, tools, and strategies into all mitigation planning, policy, funding, outreach, and implementation efforts, to apply the best available science and authoritative data to design, implement, and prioritize projects that enhance resilience to natural hazards and climate change, to integrate mitigation principles into laws, regulations, policies, and guidance to support equitable outcomes to benefit the whole community, and finally, significantly reduce barriers to timely, efficient, and effective hazard mitigation planning and action. In order to develop our SHIMP, as well as to provide coordination and partnership throughout the state on various hazard innovation and risk mitigation opportunities, we've developed a series of hazard mitigation working groups. We've got seismic, flood, fire, and other hazards as our primary hazard and working groups. And then some task-specific working groups with our GIS, goals and objectives, equity, and climate impacts. Our team's going to be doing some outreach over the next few weeks to see if there's any interest in participating in the kickoff for these working groups for this year in 2024. We anticipate having that kickoff meeting in May. So if you are interested in participating and you feel like you would like to be able to contribute to mitigating some of these hazards and being able to share ideas and best practices, please feel free to reach out to me and we'll make sure you're included in these working groups, particularly for that kickoff meeting. In order to develop the SHIMP, as well as to assess the potential impact of these hazards throughout the communities in our state of California, we performed a pretty in-depth risk assessment or exposure analysis to include 34 hazards and to determine the vulnerability of these communities to these hazard types. This included a qualitative and quantitative assessment of vulnerability and risk, meeting the new requirements set by FEMA in the development of the State Hazard Mitigation Plan. Includes the exposure of state assets, the population exposed, percentage of exposed population identified as equity priority communities, buildable lands that are exposed, and climate change impacts. And we did this for all 34 hazard types that were identified within the SHIMP. The primary hazards identified by our State Hazard Mitigation Plan in that risk analysis are the following. I will probably not read through all of these just to save some time, but these are our top 15 hazard types that were identified by the SHIMP, followed by our other hazards as identified. Our State Hazard Mitigation Plan goes into the approach, or the vulnerability and the approach and mitigation actions for every single one of these hazards. Regarding local planning, our local hazard mitigation plans have a similar process and risk assessment for these natural hazards, but focused on a specific hazard local community. We've reached out to all of our counties to develop a local hazard mitigation plan. We are nearly at 100% of counties with an actively approved local mitigation plan. Our goal is to be at 100%, hopefully within the next year or so. This is kind of a list or a breakdown of the number of mitigation actions per hazard and the percentage of all of those actions as a result as identified in the SHIMP, as well as per county, the number of hazards or the percent of those hazards represented within each of the counties within the SHIMP. To get into a bit of the funding opportunities or funding programs, we have our top programs that are most commonly known are our Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, otherwise known as 404, which is a post-disaster grant program opportunity. This funding opportunity is made of a percentage of overall federal investment from a federally declared disaster. Common misconception about the HMGP program. Some jurisdictions believe that only those designated counties in the declared counties for that disaster are eligible for HMGP. But in fact, anytime HMGP is available, it's available for the entire state of California. The Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant, which is otherwise commonly known as BRIC, is an annual nationally competitive program funding mitigation actions, primarily focused on large-scale infrastructure projects within communities. Process for that one starts typically in the fall. That funding opportunity should be posted probably around August or September. Our Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, or commonly known as FMA, is also an annual nationally competitive program funding mitigation actions specifically to protect properties insured by the NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program. That one also starts in the fall. So we're doing a lot of outreach right now to work with jurisdictions and trying to formulate strategies on how to approach this funding. We've already received some interest in submitting applications for when this funding opportunity becomes available. So we'll be just be on the lookout for potential webinars and workshops for those programs. An additional funding opportunity that was made available to the state of California this year was the FMA Swift Current Program. We received a $20 million allocation from FEMA specific to California to support buildings that are insured by the NFIP program. Unfortunately, we do see a downward trend in participating jurisdictions and property owners simply because we don't see a huge number of NFIP insured properties throughout the state. We're working with DWR to do a lot of outreach to try and enhance and increase the number of NFIP insured properties so that we can ensure that they have access to these funding opportunities when they become available. The High Hazard Potential Dam Program is a grant program managed by DWR, and it is in support of large-scale infrastructure projects to address dam hazards as identified in the LHMPs. So who's eligible to apply for this funding? State agencies, local governments, including counties, cities, and towns, special districts, so that's all of you, are federally recognized tribes, and private nonprofits. That being said, PNPs are not eligible for BRIC or FMA, which are the nationally competitive programs, but they are eligible for the HMGP program. All entities must have a FEMA approved or participate in a FEMA approved and locally adopted local hazard mitigation plan. The exception to that being the state agencies who fall under the umbrella of our state hazard mitigation plan, but all other jurisdictions must have an LHMP in order to pursue mitigation funding. So some eligible activities that are covered within these grant programs are planning grants, planning related activities, project scoping, construction project, and nature-based solutions. We don't have an exhaustive list of projects because we're always coming up with new and innovative ways to approach some of these hazard types. We're always looking to work with the jurisdiction on how they would like to address the hazard that may impact their community and developing a project that is eligible and feasible as dictated by FEMA. Another requirement in our program is to incorporate equity into all funding opportunities. So we are using a series of data sets as designated by the state of California and by FEMA to adjudicate and prioritize the scoring and ranking of our projects based on social vulnerability. We were really trying to be very intentional about making sure that we are providing equitable access to these funding opportunities. So we incorporate that into our scoring criteria specifically for BRIC and FMA to address how the projects will directly benefit disadvantaged communities and how those are going to be addressed as far as protecting those socially vulnerable communities from future disasters. And here we can send the slides out after this that has a few set of links to the various resources and tools that we use to address and adjudicate social vulnerability. So what's the process to submit a subgrant? The first step is really to request a project scoping call. We have, as mentioned, a technical assistance division that is there to support you in the development of the entire life cycle of your grant. Everything from submitting that notice of interest, developing a sub-application, coming up with ideas to support your project, and then the submission to FEMA for consideration. And then our grants division is there to support once the grant is awarded through the execution of that project. Once a notice of funding opportunity is available, that will dictate the priorities for the notice of interest. That being said, our team is accepting notices of interest on a rolling basis throughout the entire year. We want to be proactive about developing some of these sub-application for project ideas because we want to make sure that when a funding opportunity comes available, we're not rushing through the process. We know we have a general idea of what the eligibility criteria will be for that funding opportunity on an annual basis. So we want to make sure that we're developing those sub-applications in advance of the funding opportunity becoming available. Once the NOI is reviewed by CalOES, we'll set up a workshop or webinar with the sub-applicants to be able to kind of refine and develop those sub-applications prior to submission for a final review by CalOES. Once CalOES reviews those sub-applications, we may have a series of requests for information or just want some additional details to make sure that we are meeting the feasibility requirements. And once it's good to go, we submit it to FEMA for final consideration. FEMA has a pretty extensive review process to ensure that all projects meet not only the eligibility criteria, but also pass any kind of considerations for federal and state regulations, or particularly for environmental historic preservation. They also may have a series of RFIs once those projects get into the FEMA review queue. So we help to facilitate the coordination and liaising between FEMA and the sub-applicants as well to make sure that all of those RFIs are answered in a timely manner. A little bit about our technical assistance. Our team is looking to try and work with you in the development of your projects and solutions. So our first step is to identify the problem. What is the hazard that is impacting your community? How long has it been impacting your community? What are the damages that you're tending to see as far as trends within your community? And then what are the potential future conditions? What kind of impacts climate change is going to have on your jurisdiction? We then try and work with you to develop potential project solutions. We generally look at first the project types that we know are eligible and feasible, but we're always open to looking at innovative solutions and trying to push the boundaries of what's considered eligible. We want to make sure that we are trying to do what's best for your community and not just trying to do a cookie cutter solution. So we work with you to try and develop those solutions and then develop the sub application. Our technical assistance team is there to support you guys in making sure that anything that's submitted is nearly guaranteed eligibility, at least by the criteria designated by FEMA and our team. Some additional points for the scope of work. We want to make sure that it includes the location, purpose, approach, feasibility, expected outcomes, and benefits of the activity. The typical, the biggest challenge our folks have is making sure that there's a credible benefit cost analysis, making sure that there's a benefit cost analysis ratio of 1 for each of those projects is crucial in making sure that it's considered eligible by FEMA. Because it's federally funded, we want to make sure we're being mindful of taxpayer dollars when we're supporting these projects and making sure that they're cost effective. Just a little bit of historical knowledge or visibility on the success of funding for the last few years of BRIC. For the BRIC program in the last few years, last year's submission, they had nearly $2 billion worth of funding for the entire country. California managed to get all of our projects submitted for funding, totaling approximately $500 million worth of project funding. This year, we've submitted a significant amount of funding. The amount allocated for the country has decreased from over $2 billion to $1 billion, but I believe we've submitted a significant amount this year as well, so you consider, and I have that in a later slide. Similar to our just overarching funding as far as competing with the nation, almost all of our projects that are submitted for consideration have been funded. We're seeing an increase in our ability to get projects funded by FEMA for these BRIC programs. As mentioned previously, all of our projects submitted last year during the competition were selected for consideration of funding. That's all 19 projects. Prior to that, nearly 9 out of 11 projects were selected for about $180 million. And the year prior, only 4 projects out of 26 were considered. I think that the development of our technical assistance team is a huge contributor to the success of our program and being able to seek this funding and get funding approved by FEMA. Same with similar trend that we saw in our FMA program as well. With the funding availability that's made to the country each year, changing from like very small allocation amounts in 2020 and 2021 to significantly larger FMA funding availability in 22 and 23. We have significant amounts of funding that's been selected for consideration by FEMA over the last few years. In 2021, we had no projects submitted and no projects were selected for FMA. But in 2022, we had about $50 million worth of projects selected for consideration. 2023, we are also working on getting some projects submitted as well. We tend to simply because, as mentioned previously, due to the low number of NFIP insured properties, we tend to see a fewer number of projects submitted for FMA than for BRIC. But we still tend to see a pretty high success rate in being able to get those projects funded. And just as far as an update, as far as our HMGP program and where we are with those program funding opportunities, right now there is a funding opportunity available under the current disaster for Hurricane Hilary, DR 4750. The due date was in February for those notices of interest, but we're still receiving them on a rolling basis. We have currently about $415 million worth of notices of interest for that disaster. That being said, only $16 million was allocated based on the disaster cost estimate for those that funding opportunity. It was a fairly small disaster declaration, so we didn't see a huge amount of funding allocated for that. That being said, for 4683 and 4699, which were the atmospheric rivers last year, we saw a lock-in for 4683 of $221 million that's available for our funding for funding this year. And for 4699, we saw $113 million available for projects for this year. So we're currently submitting 137 projects for consideration, totaling about $501 million worth of funding for those mitigation projects. And just overall, we've currently got 180 sub-applications in FEMA review for consideration and execution, totaling to be about $1.1 billion worth of mitigation funding. That's just including the federal share, not the total project cost. That's a total of 135 subgrants for $924.8 million and 45 additional subgrants, which are in phase 2 FEMA review for $198.8 million federal share. So currently we are supporting a number of our sub-applicants, and that's jurisdictions from across the entire state of California for about $1 billion federal share. I know that was a lot of information very quickly, but I'm here to answer any questions you guys might have. We are happy also to take any questions offline and set up a scoping call or any kind of technical assistance call. My contact information is right there, and our team as well, our inbox for any kind of inquiries for technical assistance is hma@caloes.ca.gov. And I'm going to pause for any questions if we wanted to hop into the Q&A section. Thanks.
I'll ask a quick question. What's your number one tip for anyone who's considering applying?
Anyone considering applying is set up a scoping call. I mean, there's so many different ways to approach mitigation activities. So it's great for us to kind of work through what you're thinking and figuring out a way to make it feasible. So setting up a time for our technical assistance division to support you is the best way for us to come up with a solution.
Great. That's great to hear. Thank you.
I'll just rehash, the summary of my presentation, which is, there's a lot of different trends that are increasing the need for electric grid infrastructure in California in the coming years. And so, we're hoping that we can count on support from community partners like our local government partners in building the case to our state regulators to get approval for this infrastructure, because it really does come back down to just enabling our communities to function, right? Whether it's new housing, new businesses, the clean energy transition, making sure that we're more resilient to the changing environment, right? Resisting flooding and wildfires and heat waves. So, it's an investment. So, hopefully we can count on our local government partners to help us make that case to our regulators and get the approval, because it's a lot faster and a lot cheaper to do this proactively versus waiting until the last minute.
All right, thank you. Chief, any final thoughts here before we wait for the assembly member?
The only thing I would leave is that, the number one thing I hear from people affected, not just by wildfires, but other emergencies, that I have been to, is we always think it's not going to happen to us. The fire will happen to, a community in the forest, not ours. It's always somebody else's emergency, but in reality, disasters in California touch everybody. And for us specifically, wildfires, I would argue that a significant majority of homes that have been destroyed by wildfires and communities that have been impacted by wildfires are actually more urban communities that didn't know they had a wildfire problem. And so I would definitely encourage everybody to take heed to some of the warnings. And again, there's so much money and resources available through the federal government and the state government right now when it comes to wildfire and other climate-related disasters that take those opportunities right now while they last, because you never know what the budget challenges of the future, though we know the state is approaching one. So take an opportunity now to make sure that you're taking the grants, the funding to get these planning documents prepared, done, and your communities ready.
I would echo those sentiments. I think that's one of the biggest trends we've seen. And prior to my time at CalOES, I was an operations section chief for FEMA, working across the country in different disasters. And no one believes it'll happen to them. And when it happens, they wish that they had done more sooner. So we have so much funding available. We've got so much technical assistance available across the various state agencies that we all want to work towards the same end goal. We're all trying to work towards a more resilient California. So just don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're there to support you. So that's all. But thank you guys so much.